And so this is the second week in a series where we are looking at the Psalms of Lament. These are prayer songs about the suffering of living in a broken world. And regardless of your own experience or the news you've been watching, we all have some connection to suffering personally or socially or nationally as we are trying to learn what do we do with the suffering and the brokenness that we feel, and how do we connect to God in the midst of it. One of the most profound books on suffering that I've ever read is a famous book came out in the 70s called Man's Search for Meaning. That kind of comes back every 10 years ago or so. I see young people reading it again. And Viktor Frankl wrote it. He was a Swiss psychologist who spent 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. And during those years, he watched his parents be killed, his brother killed, his pregnant wife killed, but somehow he survived and eventually was released and wrote a book about his experience and talks about the reality that in this concentration camp, suffering was omnipresent. And he had this incredible image that is connected to his own experience in concentration camps of what suffering was like. And he says, suffering is similar to the behavior of gas. It will fill a chamber evenly and completely, no matter how big the chamber. Thus, suffering completely fills the human soul and conscious mind, no matter whether the suffering is great or little. Therefore, the size of human suffering is absolutely relative. And I just love this idea that no matter what you're experiencing in life, whether another person might look at it and say that's just a small thing, or another person will look at it and say that's a big thing, when you're the person suffering, it feels like the only thing. It just fills every nook and cranny of your soul in the same way gas would fill a chamber evenly. And yet the reality, he goes on to say, is that there is a present-day trend in America where the incurable sufferer is given very little opportunity to be proud in his suffering and to consider it ennobling rather than degrading, so that he's not only unhappy, but also ashamed of being unhappy. And so this is one of the challenges, and one of the reasons that we're teaching even on lament and suffering is that it's so easy in the West to be wired towards kind of this wishful optimism, to try to have to be happy clappy all the time and always upbeat. And when someone says how you're doing, to feel the pressure to go, I'm doing great, I'm killing it, I'm crushing it, or I'm busy, which means, oh, I got so much going on. And do we feel the honesty to be like, life sucks, I'm in the pit, I'm suffering. And then all of a sudden that other person doesn't know what to do with that, and they feel a little anxious, and they're like, good luck with that. And then they walk away because we struggle to know what to do with people who are suffering. And so the pressure then becomes to deny our suffering, or to numb it, or to censor our pain, just in order to kind of get back into the flow of normal society as fast as we can, to be normal again like we think everyone else is around us. And part of why I think we resist suffering is because suffering in our society, especially in the West, is often seen as meaningless. It's destructive. There's no good that comes out of suffering. But Viktor Frankl says in his book, the main point he makes is that man is actually ready to suffer. Humans are ready to suffer on the condition that his or her suffering has meaning. And part of his own journey was learning to find the meaning in the incredible suffering that he experienced. And that's what I believe the Psalms of Lament are offering us, and why we're taking 3 weeks to look at them. They are inviting us to find meaning in the midst of our suffering. The Psalms of Lament are an invitation to slow down, to grieve well, to not try to rush through what might seem destructive, but to find meaning, to find constructive value in our suffering. And to reject kind of the cultural norms that suffering is destructive, and rather realize that the biblical pattern is that suffering is worthy of being engaged. It's worthy of being expressed, and lamenting suffering actually has creative value. Good things can come from it. We are shaped into the image of Christ through our suffering. The book of Hebrews says that Jesus learned obedience by what he suffered. Even Jesus grew and matured as a human through suffering and found a deeper level of obedience to his Father. But to be shaped by suffering, we have to submit to it. We can't run from it or escape it, try to numb it out. We have to be willing to lean in, to experience it, to express it to others, to find comfort in community as we process it and share it. And so that's what this series is hopefully encouraging us to do. It's an invitation to lean into suffering, put suffering into words in the community of God's people, and to find God in the midst of it. The Psalms of Lament are sometimes referred to as the Psalms of disorientation. And you can feel that in Psalm 55 today. Last week's Psalm, if you were here, we looked at Psalm 13. It was simple, it was concise, it was had a beautiful little structure of 2 verses of protest, and then 2 verses of plea to God for help, and then 2 verses of praise. I mean, you could put a nice little bow on it with its symmetry, and it fit well, it seemed, into this little compartmentalized structure. Today doesn't feel like that at all. Today just feels like a mess. Today feels like an angry journal entry that somebody might just scribble out in the midst of their anger. It's disorganized, it's all over the place. But honestly, it feels more authentic. I mean, I started last week with the nice clean one so we could understand the pattern. But then today, as we look at it, we'll still see the pattern, but the pattern is a lot more jumbled. But in reality, it probably is easier to connect to because it feels more realistic, the way somebody would actually express that visceral release of anger and disappointment and despair. And this is the value of these prayers of lament. It allows us the safe space to have unthinkable thoughts and to utter unspeakable words in the presence of a God who is big enough to bear it. So while protest and plea are going to be mixed in these first 14 verses, let's try to use that pattern last week that gave us some structure to engage these psalms, where we go from protest to plea to praise. And let's begin in the first 8 verses and see what is it that David is protesting that is wrong in his life. So this is Psalm 55, verses 1 through 8. David says, "Listen to my prayer, O God, do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me and I am distraught because of what my enemy is saying, because of the threats of the wicked. For they bring down suffering on me and they assail me in their anger. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and the storm." There's so many emotions in these first 8 verses that kind of capture what David is protesting, what he's feeling, what he's angry about. He's restless, he's distracted, he's preoccupied, he's terrified and afraid. He's overwhelmed by the pressure that his enemies are causing him. It's almost as if he's like piling on the synonyms just to get God's attention. Hey, this is not one issue, God. This is a big issue. This is a redundant, over and over, reoccurring issue. All these emotions inside of David are leading him to do the natural human thing, which is to want to escape and get away. I just think about that scene in Forrest Gump where the little girl is saying these words over and over again in the midst of her abusive situation. Oh, that I had the wings of a dove, that I could fly away and be at rest. This is the cry of someone who's going through abuse, someone's going through pain. Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. Sometimes in some of the translations, it's not doves. Doves is like beautiful and powerful. We think of peace, but some translations just say pigeons. Oh, that I was a pigeon, and I could get away. I remember when we lived in Europe and we would travel, and we were in St. Mark's Square in Venice one time, and if you've ever been there, a lot of these big squares, and all the pigeons kind of gather around, and the tourists kind of feed them, and the locals hate it, but you'll have like 100 pigeons. And when Jackson was like 5, 6 years old, he just thought the greatest thing ever was to run full speed at a flock of pigeons and just watch them disperse, And when you're youngest child, you're 5 years old, this is the greatest power you have, is watch these pigeons flee my presence. No pigeon ever turned around and was like, yeah, you want to fight? Come on, kid. No, birds don't really have like a fight or flight instinct when they're that size. They just have a flight instinct. They just sense pressure and they're like, we're out. And then Jackson would turn around and smile at us like, yeah, I did that. And David is like, man, I don't want to fight this. I just want to get out of here. I just wish I could fly away. It's like terror is running at me, and my first instinct is, God, just get me out of here. And he expresses this desire, this first instinct to flee, which we all have. But then basically he goes on to say, okay, if I can't escape it, then God, you have to enter into it. And so my protest is I want to get out of here, but my plea for you to help is if you're not going to get me out of the situation, then I need you to come join me in it. Come be that compassionate companion who sits in my pain with me. And so in verses 9 to 15, he begins to make this plea for God to act. He says, Lord, confuse the wicked, confound their words, for I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they prowl about on its walls. Malice and abuse are within it. Destructive forces are at work in the city. Threats and lies never leave its streets. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were rising up against me, I could hide. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship in the house of God as we walked amongst the worshipers. Let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the realm of the dead, for evil finds lodging among them. Now we get to the real crux of David's crisis. He feels like he's surrounded by wickedness. He's personifying wickedness as walking through the streets and taking over the city that he lives in. He's like, Lord, I need you to enter in and to fight for me, fight with me against this evil and injustice. He says they're patrolling the walls from invaders. I mean, of course, in an old ancient Near East city like that, you would have the watchmen who would be up on the towers, and their job was to keep evil out of the city and to keep the good in the city. And he's saying, but the problem is that the watchers are actually the evil ones. They themselves are the problem. The danger is not outside of the city. The danger is within the walls. It's here. I've realized the longer I lead in pastoral ministry now, in 22, 23 some years of serving in some capacity in local churches, that the sad reality is that I have more scars emotionally, relationally, spiritually from Christians than I do from those outside the church. My friends who don't follow Jesus are some of the nicest, kindest, have not betrayed me. But some of the worst pain that I've experienced is from best friends who I discipled for years, who then wrote anonymous letters out of the blue that just tore at my heart. From staff members that I invested in and modeled and helped get promotions, who then turned around and betrayed me and slandered me to others. This horrible feeling even in the modern church today when I look out in our culture and I think, well, what's wrong with our culture? So often what I feel is wrong with it is stuff that's happening within churches, within our culture. It's not like I can point the finger and say, oh, those evil people over there, if we could get them to be more like us. I'm like, we're the problem. The enemy is within the gates. There's so many Christians, so many churches that don't look Christ-like. And again, I'll start by pointing the finger. I mean, the problem is not external to me so often in life. The problem starts right here. The hardest person to lead in any church I've ever been a part of is this guy. It's not over there. And so David is just feeling this pressure, like, I can't even run away from this. It's within the community. It's within the walls. But what's really powerful is as he goes from kind of a group of enemies, you see him narrowing down to the real problem is there's one particular person who has no business being my enemy. There's one person who's taken a stand against me, who is my close friend. He says, we had sweet fellowship, whatever that looks like. We had sweet fellowship. I trusted him as my advisor. He was in my inner circle. We used to go to church together. We used to go to the temple, the tabernacle. We would sit together. We were in worship services. A person sitting right next to you, you're like, this is my friend. They would never betray me. Months later, all of a sudden they betray you. And now you're David going, wait a minute, we were just in church together. What happened? Now, we don't specifically know the circumstances of these Psalms of Lament. Oftentimes there is no historical context. David wrote this after the time in which Psalm 51 with the David and Bathsheba story is one of the few ones where we know that psalm is related. It's him lamenting his own sinfulness, but we don't have that in Psalm 55. And yet, if you read the Old Testament and know the story of David's life, most commentators will make a pretty good educated guess that what's going on here is that he's writing this during the time when his son, Absalom, had led a rebellion against him. And so it's bad enough that his own son is turning against him and leading a rebellion, but then his son is able to recruit his top advisor, one of his cabinet members, Ahithophel. And so this close friend of his who is one day helping him to figure out how do we protect our kingdom against your son, now all of a sudden he is a traitor and he switches sides. And in 2 Samuel 15, in the historical context of this, if this is what it's from, David is told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David prayed, Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. But David continued up into the mountain of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot, and all the people with him covered their heads too, and they were weeping as they went up. The betrayal, the pain, not just my son, but my best friend have now turned on me. Now, of course, I think part of the genius of Scripture and the way God has communicated it and captured it for us as timeless truth is that sometimes there's beauty when you don't know the actual context. If you know the exact story, the exact context, you might look at it and go, oh, that's never happened to me. But I think there's a beauty that David is kind of generalizing this story without capturing people's names even, so that we as a modern reader, we read this and we're not distracted by Ahithophel. We're going, I have a friend like that. I have someone who's done that to me. I know what personal betrayal feels like. And I would think if we wanted to, we could set up a microphone and just fill the rest of the morning with just an open call to come lament your own stories of betrayal. Double-crossed by a business partner, a boss who said one thing and then set you up to fail, a friend who went behind your back and spread gossip or rumors about you, a spouse or a partner who you discovered was unfaithful to you, someone you trusted financially who didn't return, wasn't responsible with the money that you gave them. And if you've experienced that level of pain, then you can relate to verse 15 where David basically says, that guy can go to hell. He says, let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the realm of the dead where evil finds lodging. He's basically saying, you know what, that guy can go to hell for all I care. And not when they die, they can go right now. That's the point he's making. And this is, to be honest, I think kind of like, I'm emphasizing this for effect because this is often the part of these Psalms where the American modern reader kind of gets a little squirmy in her seats. Like, wait a minute, Jesus said, love your enemies and turn your other cheek. And David's telling him they can go to hell. How do we balance this out here? And let's unpack this a little bit. In the Psalms of Lament, there is often this feature, this imprecatory prayer, which is to curse one's enemies. It occurs in 6 Psalms, 4 of them are written by David. And each time in these prayers where basically the person is calling on God to judge and avenge, inherent in the call is not just spiteful vengeance. It's not just this person screwed me, God, I want you to punish them. They are expressions for zeal for the kingdom of God and his glory. David himself is the king. He's the king over the kingdom that he wants to express the goodness of Yahweh. And this person is attacking not just the king, but in his mind, the kingdom, and the kingdom that's supposed to reflect God. And so David is crying out to God, saying, God, they're maligning you, not just me. They're doing evil against you. And Lord, you need to see this. And you need to step up and express justice against this moral evil. If you don't stand up against this evil, God, then there's no hope for justice in this world. If you don't take offense at this injustice, then who will? Part of trying to get God's attention is crying out, saying, God, I desperately want to live in a world where there is some justice for evil, and you're the only judge who can do that. And so he's not merely asking God to curse his enemies because of the mistreatment he's faced. He's appealing to God to protect his holy name, to function in the world the way we all want the world to be, which is just. And so these prayers are actually a reflection of the holiness of God and his anger at injustice. And all of the statements that are found where basically someone is calling on God to judge the wicked in the moment, these are all things that God says he promises to do in eternity. That God will be a good judge who will one day judge evil and sin. And David's basically going, can we start now? Can we just get that going right now? Because I don't want to have to put up with this anymore. But I'll be honest, in my own life, even in reading these, I relate to these Psalms the older I get. When I was in my 20s and I read these, they made me feel uncomfortable. Like, whoa, easy does it. Now, as I approach 50 this fall and I've experienced more pain and more suffering, I'm like, I kind of like this one. Yeah, you tell him, David. The reality is, if we haven't experienced much suffering, that there is an uncomfortableness to this sort of a prayer. But for those who have experienced unspeakable acts of injustice, for those who have been persecuted for their faith, for those who have stood on the right thing and still had evil overwhelm them, then these prayers offer a sense of hope. This is a powerful invitation to those who are oppressed by God to express the anger that you feel, to have that cathartic value. Psalms of Lament are saying, get it out, it's okay. I want to hear what you're feeling. You see this in Revelation 6, in verse 10, where it records the cry of the martyrs, and it says, they called out in a loud voice, how long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Those who are dying for their faith are saying, how long will this continue until you one day set all things right? The irony I've experienced in kind of more of a postmodern, Western, affluent, democratic culture that we live in the U.S. is that for a lot of people, the dominant notion of God that they attach to, especially in youth, is not God of judge, but a God who is all of love. And so the harder conversation often for young people is basically to say, well, there couldn't even be a hell. I can't believe in a God who would ever send someone to hell. That belief itself arises out of a place of cultural privilege. If you don't think there should be a hell, it may be because you've never experienced something that is deserving of hell as a punishment. And there are people in third world countries, there are people even around us today who are following Jesus, who are being oppressed, who would say that the reality that God is a just, judging God is the only thing that allows me to fall asleep at night. That there is comfort in knowing that God will avenge the evil that I've had to suffer as I stood for him. And none of these imprecatory prayers for justice, they don't nullify Jesus, but they do put our life into perspective. And if God himself can in this prayer be willing to withstand this affront to his character, if he can be slow to react and can wait until that final day, if he can allow himself to be slandered through David, then we too can turn the other cheek and trust that one day God will pursue the justice that we long for right now. And David says, while we wait, while we experience the suffering and wait for the justice to come, what we are called to do in the middle is lament. And so we lament it to God. And that's what these Psalms are. They're not a mark of faithlessness or of spiritual failure. This is a therapeutic prayer that is allowing David to work through his anger, to pray through his frustrations, and finally to get it all out to the point where he can finally submit himself to God's will. And that's always the third part of these Psalms of Lament. The final piece, the final phase, is always that the psalmist ends with praise. Eventually, he can come to the point of praising God again. Verse 16, as for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. God, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change, he will hear them and humble them because they have no fear of God. My companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. But you, God, will bring down the wicked into the pit of decay. The bloodthirsty and deceitful will not live out half their days. But as for me, I trust in you. The ceaseless opposition that David felt, that he expressed in his protest, now turns into this ceaseless prayer, day and night and noon. It says he's continuing to pray. His pressures are turning him into a deeper prayer. The suffering is leading him into a place of intimacy with God. He prays until he has that sense that God is in control. This is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane praying, God, Lord, Father, I don't want to do this, but if it be your will. 3 times having to pray the same thing over and over again, almost as if it's a lament, and he's going through the protest, the plea, and then finally getting to the point of, okay, God, I trust you. I can praise you even in the midst of this suffering, and I can trust that you will work it all out through your judgment in the end. What I love about these Psalms is that David, towards the end, and I feel this as a teacher, someone who's experienced some sort of breakthrough with God, who immediately then wants to encourage others with it. David seems so confident that he turns and starts giving advice to others. And he's like, hey, here's how my suffering has shaped me. Here's what I'm learning. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. I don't even know how much he's internalized it. He may just be experiencing it, but he's so excited to feel it. He goes, oh, this is what everyone needs to feel when they're in the midst of suffering, that God will sustain you in the suffering. Join me in this process of lament. And this is what part of the creative force of suffering is, that as we work through it, as we face it, not avoid it, not try to run away, but work through it, ultimately we meet God in new ways on the other side. And as if he's saying, as a satisfied lamenter, going, I didn't know if I'd ever get to this point, but I have, and it's incredible, and I want you to join me here. I'm going to invite the band up this morning as we turn to the Lord's table. I think it's so appropriate that we are celebrating communion this morning, because one of the messages that we are reminded of every time we come together as a community to participate in the Lord's Supper is that we never suffer alone. That the bread and the juice that we receive are symbolic of Jesus' sufferings. They are reminders that he not only suffered on our behalf, but that he continues to join us in our suffering today. His body was broken. His blood was shed in the most heinous act of cosmic injustice. The creations killing their creator. And do you know that in that moment, on those 7 things that Jesus says on the cross, one of the things that he famously cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's a quote of an Old Testament psalm of lament. He's in the midst of his suffering, lamenting in the same way that David is, in the same way that we're invited to. Even in his death, he's modeling us this need to lament our sufferings, to name them, and to bring them to the Father. And so this morning, we are invited to join in Jesus' suffering through these elements, because if we do not join with him in his suffering, we cannot join with him in his glory and resurrection. So today, as you come forward and partake of these elements, remember that Jesus meets you in the midst of your suffering, and that a day will come when all will be made right. And every act of injustice that you have experienced will be judged, and everything that is broken will one day be made beautiful. The table is open. I invite you to come forward this morning.